Welcome to negative air units challenge testing, also used to be known as DOP testing. DOP stood for dioxyphthalate, a chemical that we used to use to challenge the HEPA filters with that we no longer use because we figured out it was a carcinogen, the same as asbestos. So everybody understands we challenge test vacuums and other HEPA filtered equipment exactly the same as we do negative air units. Today, we're going to concentrate on the negative air units. We challenge test negative air units to assure that they do not exhaust particulate matter to areas outside of containment. We're not going to concern ourselves with the negative pressure or the air changes per hour today. We're going to concentrate on how to test the units to assure that they are functioning in a fashion that is both safe and efficient. When we test negative air units, the most likely units to fail are often the brand new units that have never been used. It's not that the HEPA filter fails. It's usually that the HEPA filter isn't seated properly or the components of the housing often leak. HEPA filters in the new units are sometimes damaged upon arrival. That's what's going on here. You see a brand new unit with a damaged HEPA filter. Sometimes, even when you buy a replacement filter, it shows up damaged. Another issue with HEPA filters, if you can see the difference between these two HEPA filters, one of them has a black band around the outside of it. That's a gasket. The other one doesn't show that gasket. The one with the gasket towards the worker is the HEPA filter is in backwards. That gasket needs to sit up against an L bracket on the inside of the negative air unit in order to function properly. It's not just that the HEPA filter goes in backwards, it causes a problem. When it's in backwards and locked down, the brackets that hold the HEPA filter in place kink the gasket. So even if you were to turn this filter around, you're going to end up with a gap between the gasket and that L bracket. We're filtering particulate matter as small as 0.3 microns. Now, a micron is a millionth of a meter, and you get between 50 and 100 microns across the width of a human hair. So we're talking about particulate matter that is 3/1000ths the width of a human hair. It doesn't take much of a gap in that gasket for a massive amount of particulate matter to get around the filter and be exhausted into our supposedly clean air. You want to be careful when you open a negative air unit. They're going to be very dirty on the inside. A negative air unit should show up on every job site sealed with plastic and duct tape, and never want to open them until you've turned the negative air unit on. That way, all of this dust or debris, if it is disturbed, will get sucked into the HEPA filter. Basically, when we test the units, we blow smoke made of particulate matter 0.3 microns and larger. We have a sensor in the exhaust of the unit that can detect these 0.3 microns and larger particulate matter. And if more than 99.97% of the air is not particulate free, then the unit fails and cannot be used. With vacuums, even though we're inside containment, we do not want a vacuum that leaks because it will increase the amount of exposure that our workers are exposed to. Everyone that tests negative air units blows smoke across the HEPA filter and at the edges of the HEPA filter. However, the entire back half of the negative air unit is under negative pressure. The unit housing and all the components there need to be tested as well. What else could leak? The control panel could leak. This panel is located on the back half of the unit, which is under negative pressure and is located behind the HEPA filter. Air can move into the negative air unit and can be exhausted if each of these penetrations through the housing is not sealed properly. The power switch itself in the white rectangle, if seated properly, is not likely to leak. The blue arrows pointing to screws are potential leak points. The gauge in the green circle, even if slightly unseated, can leak. The circuit breaker can leak, and the missing switch or button on the bottom left, the red arrow is pointing, will always leak. The L bracket rivets, that bracket that the HEPA filter needs to seat up against, could leak. The wheel attachments could leak. The power connection could leak. All of these are potential leaks. A unit that passes across the HEPA filter but fails across the housing components can still be used. We just need to make sure that the face of the unit needs to be inside containment, both so it can pull air from inside, but also so that the pre-filters, the air conditioning filter and the bulk debris and moisture filter, can be changed by workers on the inside. We don't have to open the unit up outside of containment. Never trust the DOP tester just to know how to test. They won't test the entire unit unless you require them to. They're only going to test across the HEPA filter and around the HEPA filter to see if it is seated properly. Even when they do test the entire unit, they don't always know how to do it. Here you can see somebody that has smoke blowing into the HEPA filter and they're putting the sensor underneath the unit. That will never fail because air underneath the unit is moving into the negative air unit, not having air come out of it. The squirrel fan at the back of the unit is pushing air out that exhaust manifold. It's pulling air into the unit. So you need to switch this. You need to put the sensor in the flex tubing, as we saw, the exhaust, and blow the smoke at the rivet connections, at the handles, at the wheel attachments. One last thing, never stack negative air units upside down. You see this as a fairly common occurrence on abatement jobs where they want to make it as secure as possible so that one unit doesn't roll off the top of the other. However, inside the negative air units, as you see on the right, there are two sleepers properly against that gasket in the back, the L bracket. If you flip the unit over, there are no comparable sleeper brackets at the top of the unit. What happens is that the HEPA filter can actually drop up to an inch when the unit is flipped upside down, creating an inch gap for air to go around the filter instead of through the filter. So don't ever do this. Once you have DOP tested the unit, you never want to take it off its wheels. Even something here where we just tilt the unit up. If this unit has been DOP tested prior to being shrink wrapped, now that it is shrink wrapped, we need to DOP test it again to assure that we haven't unseated that filter from that L bracket on the inside. Now, this concerned only the need to test the negative air units and the vacuums. In a separate training, we'll discuss the purpose of negative air pressure and the air changes per hour, two totally different questions for negative pressure. Thank you for listening. Please proceed to the quiz.